Welcome in, everybody, to the Real Ballz podcast. I am your host, Ryan Squires, and I'm going to be discussing with you today on a Monday edition of the show the most important, the most driving thing we have basically going forward in our sport for all competitive bowlers, and that is money. Money, money, money. It's what drives our sport on every level, whether it's starting out, whether it's competitive, whether it's, league bowling, whether it's open play. However it is, it impacts our game. We are talking about money. But first, I want to start off with some bowling news and updates, as always, on this special Monday edition. The WBT Thailand is going on currently and will conclude on Friday for the World Bowling Tour title, as well as the PBA 50 Invitational coming up September 29th and 30th. There will only be 14 competitors total in that PBA 50 Invitational. That's taking place in North Carolina. You got your 12-point leaders in the PBA 50, as well as 2 additional invitees. And then don't forget, upcoming in Tulsa, Oklahoma in October is the PBA Flow Bowling fall swing back in action, this time in Oklahoma instead of in Detroit, but that'll be taking place October 14th through the 20th. So that should be pretty awesome to watch and get back in the flow of things, no pun intended, but get back into PBA bowling and really start to kick things off. But like I said, I want to talk about money today, and money as in why we bowl. So when we look at money and we break down how people start out to bowl, they start out because they enjoy the game. They start out because they want to get better. They start out for a multitude of reasons, whether they're young, whether they're old. But at a certain point, they get to a level where they want to compete at a higher level. They want to continue to grow. They want to continue to build their game. And so they start competing in tournaments and in higher end leagues and whatnot. And what that does is that opens them up to more opportunities to make money while bowling. Now, I think making money while bowling is a great thing if you've got the talent to do it, but it can also be a factor that can really hurt the overall sport if it's not controlled properly. And what I mean by that is, if it's the main driving force behind why you're competing, then you're competing for the wrong reasons. And that's something that I think really, really factors into a different percentage of bowlers. So we bowl leagues, tournaments, but both of which, whether it's a handicap tournament that has a good payout or it's a scratch tournament that has a good payout, whether it's a handicap league or a scratch league, regardless of what it is that we're competing in, the fact is that in most of these, they have influenced us to bowl in one way or another, whether it is to win. But what is it that we win? Most cases, when it comes to winning, it's the prize fund we're interested in, not necessarily winning the actual tournament just to claim a title. Nobody wants a trophy. They want the money that goes with it. And so to me, that's something that when I look at it and I say, okay, well, that's great. We've got an opportunity to make extra money while competing. The problem is that you have a lot of people who will only compete. And I remember when I was bowling and competing that there was only certain leagues I would bowl in. There was only certain tournaments I would bowl in and whatnot, because of the fact that you wanted the events that paid the best. You wanted to have the best chance of getting your money back and making more. But you also looked at other things that factored into that. Side pots, such as high game, series, strike jackpots, clean game and series, brackets. Brackets are a great way for bowling centers to make money. They bring in, $40 in a bracket and pay out $35. If you run a good event, you can make a lot of money in brackets, both for the bowler and the bowling center. So those are things that can help influence our decisions to compete. But in a league, you've got your mixed leagues, men's leagues, women's leagues, but oftentimes you'll find a lot of scratch bowlers who only want to compete in scratch tournaments, and you'll find a lot of handicap bowlers who won't compete at all unless they're in a handicap event because of the handicap. And so it creates a bit of a divide. And what I think you see a lot of is you see these scratch bowlers who will not compete in these handicap events, which for the most part is understandable in the sense that they want to make sure that they have the best chance to get as much money back as possible. But at the same time, if they're not competing in those events, then the handicap events are going to be a totally different ball game. Those are going to be something that is totally different from a scratch event in the sense that it could be a longer tournament. It could be a higher attended tournament. That's the thing about scratch events, is that they're so difficult to put on because you are going after such a small minority of the population of bowlers. Whereas if you open up a handicap event, you're not going to have as many high-end bowlers, but you're more likely to have a wider array of bowlers to pick from. And so that's something that I think we can oftentimes forget, is that when we're focused on that 1% or that small minority of bowlers that are scratch bowlers, we tend to forget that there is an entire field of bowlers out there that, though they are not scratch, still want to compete. And that's the other thing that really becomes difficult when managing these tournaments and trying to decide if you want to make your event a handicap event or a scratch event, is the fact that scratch bowlers, we know they're competitive. We know that they want to compete. We know they want to go out each week and continue to try to win and make more money and do better. Whereas with handicap events, it's a little bit harder. Even though you've got a bigger field to pick from, it's a little bit harder to get those people to compete. They aren't taking the game quite as seriously in most cases. So it's a lot harder to get people who don't take the game as seriously in to necessarily compete against, particularly against scratch bowlers, even if they do have handicap. So I want to make sure that when we talk about this topic, that we discuss it in a broad range and basically break it down as we would as a bowler, but also outside of bowling, looking at it and going, okay, are we being fair to both sides? Because oftentimes it's very difficult to get both sides to compete on the same level, and it's very, very difficult, I'm sure as many of you know, to get anybody to compete on that level and say it's fair. Whether it's sandbagging, whether it's average verifications, whether it's different patterns, whatever it is, that oftentimes it is very difficult to get two people who are in different categories of skill level to agree that they are equal in competition with handicaps. So, like I said, when you appeal to the scratch bowler, you're appealing to a small percentage. And when you do that, that small percentage has a little bit more of an expectation. And so that can be really difficult to manage. I think that's one of the biggest things that holds a lot of tournaments back, is that as a proprietor, though you can make good money running a tournament and you can make good bracket money and everything else, the fact is it's very difficult to please oftentimes some of your higher end bowlers, whether it's the pattern, the event, the payout. It just seems as though oftentimes you can never please the higher end bowlers, whereas part of that reason could be because of the fact that they're bowling for money and not necessarily to compete and for fun. Whereas on the lower end bowlers, what's appealing to them is that, the handicap automatically eliminates the scratch competition in a lot of places. A lot of people will not compete as a scratch bowler in handicap events. So they've got a better chance of making their money back. And that's one way that I know a lot of people who have handicap will look at it. But, handicap tournaments also, can go on for a lot longer periods. You'll see a lot of state tournaments, national tournaments, and anything that works in handicap will go on for typically longer periods because they have to accommodate more bowlers. That can lead to a higher prize fund. So ultimately, it'll bring the scratch bowlers in anyway because they want a chance to at least try to get that prize fund. But it also provides an opportunity for all skill levels. And I think that that's something that we are vastly not looking at in a category of the fact that everybody wants to compete, okay? If they're bowling every week in league, they're wanting to compete, whether it's against somebody else or whatever it is, whether it's for a ring, a goal of their own, whether it's for money, a league title, whatever it is, they're competing for a reason. They're wanting to have some sort of competition. So by having these events, we allow everybody to compete and everybody the opportunity to basically feel as though that they are improving. And when people feel that they're improving, they feel more invested in the game. And that trickles down, like we've discussed in other podcasts, across multiple platforms. If you feel invested, if you feel like you're making a contribution to the game, you feel like you're getting better, you feel good about your game, then you're going to continue to invest in that game, whether it's in leagues, tournaments, whatever it is. And that's good for everybody. The more that people are invested, the better it is for everybody, in hopes of building up a sport again that is competitive across the board. Because nobody was born a scratch bowler. That's the biggest thing. And I think that's forgotten a lot. And that's one of the categories I had here was, how can bowlers help? And so that's something that I think is often forgot, is that when you're a scratch bowler, you often forget that you were never a scratch bowler. You think you were just born that way. But the fact is everybody had to improve at some point. They learned from different people. I remember growing up learning from some of the people that I learned from, and I remember thinking how good it felt to continually feel like you were getting better. But nobody wants to keep continuing if they're not getting better. So how can we all help? We can help by basically treating all skill levels with a respect, with the development of others. And a lot of people will say, well, why would I want to help develop my competition? Well, the fact is, though they may be your competition right now, or not right now, but they could be, the fact is that if there is no competition out there, then your event is not going to even provide an opportunity for you to make money. That's the biggest thing I think people miss, is that you've got to have participation for any event to be good, for any league to be good, for any tournament, bracket, whatever it is. If people don't participate, we've all been to those tournaments where people weren't there. We've all been in those brackets where you barely got enough to get a bracket put together, whatever it was. If you don't have the participation, then the scratch bowler who is competing for the money is not going to have the money to compete for. And so I feel like it's always incumbent upon us to make sure that we are treating all skill levels with respect and making sure that we are doing whatever we can to develop other bowlers in the process. Now, part of the reason this continues on is because for lower average bowlers, they're going to continue to compete because they want to develop, they have a desire to improve, and they want, like I said, to compete. They hope to get better to compete in higher end events. Whereas a higher average bowler, they're competing, their main primary goal, money, typically. That's usually always the main motivator, whether it's leagues or whatever it is. Competition is always a close second. You've got the thrill of winning. I don't think anybody who's ever won an event can replace the thrill of winning, but also the opportunity to improve. And I put that one last because that is often last in when you talk about higher end scratch competitors. It's usually always about the money, the competition, and the thrill of winning. So when you put all those together, almost all of them, lower average and higher average, have something in common. They have the desire to improve and the desire to compete. But the one thing that is different for the higher average bowler compared to the lower average bowler is the money aspect. When you start competing only for money, what ends up happening is first of all, you could end up really causing your game to go downhill, but you lose sight of the bigger picture. You lose sight of the bigger picture of the event. You lose sight of the bigger picture of the league. And when that is the main motivator, you really potentially set yourself up for nothing but disappointment and really make yourself open to becoming more and more jaded in the process towards the sport. I give a big example of this. So back when I was competing about 10 years ago, I went to a state tournament and won a bunch of money, shot 800 or whatnot, and won a bunch of money in the event, and I just thought it was awesome. Well, the following year, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to load up in brackets. This was my chance to make a bunch of money. I took, I think I put, $300 or $400 in brackets and in singles. And knowing how well I had done the previous year, I thought, well, this will be really good. I'll make a fortune here. I mean, last year I made a fortune as well, right? So load up in brackets, do all that, and I go out and I compete, and the shot was night and day difference. It was when they were experimenting with the red, white, and blue, and we were in an old wood center, and I remember going out and shooting 168. So I now have lost all the money I had invested in brackets, right? Go from shooting 800 one year and making a bunch of money to losing everything in the first game or two of the event. And I was so pissed off. I was so angry that I had just thrown away all that money. I hadn't won any high games. I hadn't won any brackets. I made it through 0 brackets, not one. And so I was so pissed off. But in the process, I treated everybody like shit around me. And so my teammates, who were my friends at the time too, treat them like shit. And you're just saying, well, I'm not winning any money, so I'm angry about it. And then I shoot 300 the last game. So 168, 300. I win one high game, it paid me $18. Okay, lost every bracket, all that money. But I shot 300, and they bring me down this bottle of champagne. That's what they would do. They bring you a bottle of champagne if you shot 300. And this bottle of champagne, I'm looking at it, I'm like, awesome. So I go back to the hotel, and I'm getting ready to spray this bottle of champagne, because obviously I wasn't going to do it on the lanes. And I'm getting ready to walk in the door of the hotel, and all of my teammates, who you would normally have there with you, who would normally be celebrating with you, they were all pissed off. They didn't want anything to do with it. They didn't want anything to do with me and my champagne or anything else, not because they weren't my friends, not because they didn't like me, but because the way I acted when I had lost all that money, it had created basically no desire for them to want to spend any time around me. And so what I get with that is that when you're motivated by money only to compete, what you end up doing is you actually end up pushing the groups of people that you're competing with further and further away. And if you're competing in singles events, that's fine. If you're saying, well, I'm only competing in singles events, okay, fine. But eventually you had to learn from somebody, and so somebody's probably learning from you in the process. So you can't really look at it and say, well, I only care about myself I'm solely focused on my game, solely focused on my performance. But you got to pay attention to who's watching you, who is looking at you as an example of what they had hoped to be or hope to improve to be. Because like I said, even if you compete with people and you learn from people and you do all that, when you let money motivate all of your bracket decisions, when you let money motivate your league decisions, your tournaments, everything, you are only setting yourself up to have nothing but disappointment in the end, because there's going to be events where you put so much in that you're so focused on making money that you don't focus on seeing the adjustments you need to see before you need to see them, making the moves that you need to make in order to improve and to score the best. You blind yourself because you're trying to force a square peg into a round hole. You do nothing but try to make something happen instead of what got you there in the first place, which is typically just releasing the ball, making sure your fundamentals are good, and using what you've learned over that time to get better. And I've seen it happen with players over and over again on the PBA. I've seen so many players that are out there competing for their dinner that night. They're competing for the ability to, what used to be back in the day, it was an exemption, competing to make a cut, whatever it is. They have expenses to pay. They have costs and things of that nature, and so they're competing for the money, and so that's something that's very important to them. But for the average bowler, as a league bowler, if you're bowling league for the money, if you're bowling tournaments for the money, then and you're thinking that you're going to make money on it, and that's why you're doing it, then you're doing it for the wrong reasons. See, that's why I really enjoy a lot of the lower end events, and as well as a lot of the PBA events I like to watch, because there's a purity about this sport. And if you ever sit down at a PBA event, and not everybody can do this, but if you ever sit at a PBA event and you watch them compete, a lot of times you can watch it's almost like you can zone everybody out and you can look right down the lane and you can basically look at the people or look at the lane, watch the ball, and you can watch. There's a purity about this sport. There's a purity that goes with this sport that you can basically put as a personal connection when you're a bowler. But if you lose that desire, that purity of the sport, when you are solely motivated by the money when you're competing, then you're competing for the wrong reasons. And ultimately, it's just going to come back and bite you in the ass. So, like I said, if you're out there trying to compete in hopes of, or out there competing in hopes of becoming a PBA player or a regional player or whatever it is, that's fine. But don't lose sight of the fact that it's still a game. It's still supposed to be fun. And I think a lot of people lose the sight that it's fun. And I will be the first to admit I lost it. I became very jaded on it because it just wasn't fun anymore. Because every week you debate, okay, what league, or every year, what league am I going to bowl? Well, that one doesn't pay out as well. So I'm going to travel 50 miles across town to compete in a league that pays better. Well, what events are you going to bowl this year? Are you going to bowl national tournaments, state tournaments, local tournaments? You know, when it came down to it, a lot of times, I never once bowled the Open Championships. Simply because I've always said if I'm going to spend my money, I want to spend my money on a tournament that I feel like I've got a really good shot at winning. So when we would do the USBC state tournaments, we would do well-known tournaments such as the Peterson and things of that nature. Those events, we always felt like those events had the opportunity to win money at. But when you only focus on competing because you want to make that money, you just lose sight overall. And it was very easy to lose sight of it because you said, well, if I bring X amount of dollars, you're looking at it as an investment. You're investing in yourself and your talent in hopes that you're going to make more than what you came with. And the fact is that you lose sight of the fact that it's supposed to be a game. It's supposed to be fun. There was a time when you were competing because you wanted to get better. You wanted to improve. And that's why a lot of the handicap events, though they may have decent prize funds, you oftentimes see that the bowlers that are competing in those handicap events, they're not as good, but they also tend to have a little more fun. You'll see a lot more mixed handicap events. They have a little more fun. They're more relaxed. And those events like that, those will make bowling overall grow in the long run. So I think we can't lose sight of the fact that the whole goal for everybody is not to make money while you compete. It's to enjoy the game. It's to improve. And like I said, we all have one thing in common. We want to feel what it feels like to be a winner. We want to feel what it feels like to improve. We want to feel what it feels like to be able to step on the lanes and compete against someone right next to us and do better than they do. But if that leads to money in the end, great. If not, we should be okay with that. And we are fortunate that we have the opportunity to make bracket money and high game money and things of that nature. There's a lot of other sports that don't even have that opportunity. So we should be happy that we have that opportunity, but not take advantage of it. Also not make it our sole main focus for doing so. And I think that that's something that we really have to continue to look forward and continue to do. Because like I said, you don't want to be that guy who shoots 300 and nobody gives two shits about you because you are an asshole the whole time you compete, you know? And like I said, I can say that because I was that asshole. So if you got any criticisms, piss off. But, you know, as I said, don't lose sight of the priority. This week I've got some really good shows coming up, and this was the first one, but I really have been doing the last couple shows for feedback, and I've loved a lot of the feedback that I've gotten recently. But Wednesday's show, I'm going to do a product review show on Wednesday, mainly covering products that at one time were extremely popular and maybe have fallen by the wayside now, or new products that are rather new, innovative, and whatnot. So Wednesday's show will be kind of for everybody, as well as, you know, covering some things that maybe people didn't know, like where certain products come from and why we still have them today. You know, if something's outdated, why do we still have it? But I'll be covering that on Wednesday, and then I got a really good show on Friday coming up as well. But as I said, you know, I just want to make sure that we touch on the fact that I always hear people bitching and complaining about money, about payouts, about, you know, everything that has to do with money in bowling. But the fact is that everybody is competing for different reasons, but we all are competing nonetheless in the same sport. Let's not lose sight of that. Let's make sure that we continue to improve, continue to feel better and get better, and, you know, stay building in that industry, building the entire USBC, PBA, PWBA. We're really setting an example for the bowlers moving forward, and we want to make sure that we continue to give them something that they want to compete at. Nobody wants to compete if they're surrounded by a bunch of assholes. And I remember leagues that I didn't bowl in because it was just full of assholes. And so, you know, make sure that you treat everybody well. You got to make sure that people are improving. And while it's not your sole responsibility to make them improve, if you do help people improve, they will pay it back tenfold. So, like I said, it's not a question of whether you should do it or not. You should. And it's not a question of whether it will help you or not. It will. The fact is that if you don't help people and you're the asshole who runs them off, the simple fact is that eventually you're going to run people off and there won't be any events to compete in. So help yourself by helping others. Don't focus on just money when you're competing. Focus on the love of the game, and the rest will follow. And getting better. That's the main thing. Constantly improving, because nobody's perfect in an imperfect game. So focus on getting better, and join me on Wednesday for the product review episode, 5 o'clock Eastern time. Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Real Ballz podcast. This was a shorter episode, but like I said, it was an important one. Make sure to share it with everyone, and join me on Wednesday for our 5 p.m. Eastern time, Real Ballz podcast product review. Thank you, and have a wonderful week, and enjoy your Monday Night Football.